it's clear from what you said there, but also clear from a lot of the research that I did on you and your backstory, that much of the driving motivation behind why you are what you are today and why you help people and why you do the work you do and make the content you make was because of this early experience with bullying. And I've sat here with so many people who are real anomalies in their lives for a variety of different reasons, maybe in business or in science or in sport. And I so often find that the reason why they're brilliant is also fundamentally interlinked to the reason why they struggle, or they struggled, shall I say. And in your story, that seems to be very pertinent. I read a quote you said on a video you made 7 years ago where you said, "I had intense and sustained emotional bullying. I would be put in a corner by 4 to 5 people and be obliterated repeatedly."
Yeah, I mean, when I'll tell people, like, the reason I started lifting weights and bodybuilding, it was not the noblest of reasons. It was very much, you say I'm worthless, I'm going to prove you wrong, you know? And I would love to say that it has no remnants today, but that would be a lie, right? Some of the stuff I still struggle with in terms of, I have a hard time trusting myself a lot of the times because I got told for so long, or trusting some decisions I make. I got told for so long, you do it wrong, you suck, you're worthless, those sorts of things.
When you went to therapy, you were diagnosed with a form of PTSD, bullying PTSD, they call it, don't
Yeah, my therapist, she diagnosed me, and I remember saying, I don't have PTSD. Like, that's for soldiers. That's for belief. And she goes, "First off, Lane, you don't like it when people correct you as a professional in your field. Don't correct me. And you're right. You didn't witness people die, nothing like that. But trauma is trauma." And her explanation of it was, it is all relative. And it may not have been, horrors from war, but for your brain, it was traumatic. And the way she explained it is, trauma is something that causes you to react or act in response to something even after that event has passed, right? So for me, for example, I've struggled in personal relationships where either partners or friends trying to give me feedback, and I immediately get defensive, very defensive. And if you read about relationships, that's not great, right? It's one of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse for relationships. And I never understood. I just thought, well, I'm just explaining myself. And then now I understand it's because that was my response to the bullying, because feedback or criticism to me feels like bullying, even though it's not.
So you have a defense mechanism because you had to defend yourself back then.
And it's so interesting, the things that we adopt to survive when we're young become maladaptive when we get older.
It's difficult to unpick all of that when you're an adult, isn't it? Because it's very hardwired. They say you can't teach an old dog new tricks. But I've got my own trauma responses that I'm still trying to work through, and I'm now aware of them, but they still, on a bad day, on an unslept day, they can still come to the surface.
I tell people, I don't know if you can completely undo your default setting, right? But I think what you can do is get mindful of it and learn tools to manage it, right? And I mean, it's interesting how this ties into obesity, because I used to be somebody who I've never been obese, never been overweight, nothing like that. When I got to grad school, I was very much more towards the side of, if you're obese, it's because you're lazy, it's your fault, And then the more I just observed, I realized that can't be true, because look at all these, there's so many obese people that are successful in other areas of their life where they apply a lot of discipline. What is it about this thing, right? And I remembered I read a study, and I hopefully I get this correct because it was a while back, but they looked at obese women, and they found that obese women were 50%, I believe 50%, more likely to have sexual assault trauma in their past. And you also look at the obesity literature, and people who are obese tend to have a greater reward response from food. Whereas people who are lean or normal weight, it's not like that huge reward that they get. It's like some people, you know, they can have a drink, they can have a beer, and they go, I like the beer, you know, and other people become alcoholics, right? And so much of this stuff gets tied up in, it gets wired in as a kind of coping mechanism. If you look at, like, for example, binge eating, what's happening during a binge is that person is getting a flood of dopamine, right? They're masking, they want to mask that feeling of whatever made them feel uncomfortable. I always tell people, I'm like, you don't really find people binge eating after they've had 8 hours of sleep at 10 a.m. in the morning when they're low stress, right? It's at 10 p.m. at night after a long day. They've been fighting with their spouse, their kids are driving them nuts, and they want to turn it all off, right? And I think staying mindful is one of the hardest things we have as humans. I mean, I know what my addiction is, unfortunately, based on my current job. I get way too into social media. You know, I just end up, you know, it kind of started as, well, I'm doing work, right? And I'm responding to comments and all that stuff. And pretty soon I'm looking at my screen time and I'm going, oh my gosh, right? And so that was something for me to numb up and turn my mind off, right? But for other people, it's food. For other people, it's gambling. For other people, it's alcohol. For other people, it's some other drug,